They said it was an accident. But when I saw my son's blood-stained wedding ring lying on that cold hospital floor, I knew someone had traded love for murder. Rain kept falling outside the hospital window, each drop sounding like a ticking clock, counting down the last seconds of the world I once knew. The doctor's voice was calm, rehearsed, almost mechanical as he said the words that would break me forever. "Mrs. Dawson, I'm sorry. We did everything we could. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stood there, gripping the edge of the counter, staring at his lips as if my disbelief could rewind time. My son, Mark Dawson, 34 years old, a man who fixed everyone else's problems, was gone. They said his car skidded off the road, crashed through the guardrail, and sank into Silver Lake. They said it was a malfunction. But Mark was careful. Too careful. He checked every bolt, every brake, every tire. And when I saw the ring, cracked and soaked in dried blood, something deep in my soul whispered that the truth had been buried beneath that lake with him. When Vanessa, his wife, arrived at the hospital, she didn't look like a grieving widow. Her hair was perfect, her makeup untouched by tears. She sighed softly, as if the whole thing were just an inconvenience. "Can we handle the insurance papers tomorrow?" she asked the nurse without even glancing at the sheet that said, "Time of death, 11:43 p.m. I remember staring at her, waiting for the breakdown, the sobbing, the shaking hands. But it never came. Just cold composure, as though she had been expecting this. That night I went home to an empty house that still smelled like cinnamon and motor oil, Mark's favorite candle, and the scent of the garage where he used to fix up old trucks. I sat in the dark, holding the broken ring in my hand. The rain kept whispering against the window, and I could almost hear his voice in the sound. "Mom, if anything ever happens to me, take care of Lily." Lily was only 3, a bundle of joy with her father's brown eyes and her mother's stubborn curls. Mark adored her. Every Sunday they'd drive to Silver Lake to feed the ducks and watch the sunset. That was their tradition. The same lake that swallowed him. 2 days later, there was a knock at my door. I thought it might be a friend, maybe a neighbor coming to offer condolences. But when I opened it, Vanessa stood there with a lawyer. Her tone was calm, too calm. "I'm here for Lily's things," she said, glancing around as if my home were just another obstacle on her to-do list. "Lily will stay with me. It's what Mark would have wanted." I gripped the doorframe, my heart pounding in my chest. "Mark wanted her safe," I whispered, my voice trembling. Vanessa's lips curled into something that might have been a smile if not for the cruelty in her eyes. "Safe means away from you, Margaret. You can barely walk without that cane. What kind of future can you give her?" She turned away before I could answer, and I watched her walk to her car with Lily crying in her arms, reaching for me through the rain. That sound, Lily's desperate, heartbroken cry, echoed in my chest long after the car disappeared down the street. The days that followed blurred together. I barely ate. I barely slept. But grief has a strange way of sharpening the mind. Instead of fading, my sorrow turned into suspicion. Something inside me refused to rest. I started asking questions, small ones at first, quiet enough not to draw attention. I called Mark's mechanic. Was there something wrong with his car? I asked. There was a pause. Then the man whispered, "The brake line was cut clean, ma'am. Not worn, not rusted, cut." My blood ran cold. A week later, I called the insurance office. The woman on the phone hesitated before saying, "Mrs. Dawson, I probably shouldn't tell you this, but the policy your son had, his wife recently doubled it. Just last month." That night, I couldn't breathe. Every memory twisted into something darker. The way Vanessa didn't cry. The way she talked about insurance. The way she had rushed to take Lily. Then, 3 nights later, a letter appeared in my mailbox. No return address. Just my name written in shaky ink. Inside, one line. "If you want the truth, go to Silver Lake. Midnight. Come alone." I sat there for hours, the paper trembling in my hand. Fear wrestled with fury. I thought of Lily's tiny fingers clutching her stuffed rabbit, of Mark's laughter in the kitchen, of the way Vanessa's eyes had stayed dry. By 11:30, I had made up my mind. I took my old cane, wrapped Mark's ring around a chain, and hung it around my neck. The road to Silver Lake was slick with rain. The headlights cut through the darkness like a knife through velvet. When I reached the lake, the world was silent except for the soft hiss of the storm and the rippling of water against the shore. I waited, clutching the ring. At midnight, I heard footsteps. A man stepped from the trees, his face half hidden beneath a hood. "Mrs. Dawson?" His voice trembled. "Yes," I said, tightening my grip on the cane. "I worked at the auto shop where your son brought his car," he said. "I shouldn't be here, but you need to know. He didn't die by accident." The words punched the air out of my lungs. "What do you mean?" "She paid someone," he whispered. "Vanessa. She paid Carlos, one of the guys at the shop, to cut the brakes. Said she'd take care of the rest. I could barely stand. My knees shook, my heart thundered in my chest. "Do you have proof?" He nodded, pulling a small flash drive from his pocket. "Security footage from the night before your son's death. It shows her with Carlos. Keep it safe. If they find out I talked—" He didn't finish the sentence. Headlights flared through the trees. The man's face turned white. "They found me," he whispered. He shoved the flash drive into my hand and ran toward the woods. I shouted for him to stop, but before I could take a step, 2 sharp cracks split the night. Gunshots. Then silence. I fell to my knees, mud soaking through my dress, rain mixing with tears. Somewhere in the distance, I heard a splash, then nothing but the whisper of water. My breath came in ragged gasps as I looked down at the flash drive in my trembling hand. When I finally stood, my legs felt heavy, but my purpose burned brighter than ever. If Vanessa thought she had buried the truth beneath that lake, she was wrong. I might have been old, but I wasn't finished. I walked back to my car, clutching the flash drive and the ring, whispering to the darkness, "You took my son. You won't take my granddaughter." And in that moment, as lightning split the sky over Silver Lake, I swore I would uncover every secret, no matter what it cost me. The storm hadn't stopped. It followed me home like a shadow that refused to let go, each rumble of thunder reminding me that somewhere in the dark, a man had died trying to tell me the truth. I sat in my kitchen, the lights off, the flash drive lying on the table between my trembling hands. I couldn't bring myself to plug it in. Not yet. I kept thinking about Mark, about the way he laughed when he teased me for still using paper calendars. I used to tell him technology was a trap. That night, as I stared at that tiny piece of plastic and metal, I realized it might be the only thing keeping his death from disappearing into silence. I finally gathered the courage to insert the drive into my old laptop. The screen flickered and a single video file appeared. My hands shook as I clicked play. The footage was grainy, the timestamp from 2 nights before the accident. The camera showed a corner of the auto shop. I recognized the red truck, Mark's, and then she appeared. Vanessa, wearing a long black coat, her hair tied back, walking in with a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, with tattoos running up his neck. They moved close to the car, whispering. Then, clear as thunder, her voice cut through the static. "Cut the brakes. Make it look clean. He has an insurance policy that'll take care of everything. I just need it done before Friday." The man nodded, handed her a paper and said something I couldn't make out. She gave him an envelope. Then she smiled, the same cold smile she gave me at the hospital, and walked away. My chest tightened. I paused the video and pressed my hand against the screen, as if I could reach through it and pull Mark back from that moment. I replayed her words again and again until I could recite them from memory. By the time the sun began to rise, I wasn't a grieving mother anymore. I was a woman with a mission. The next morning, I went to the local police station. The officer behind the desk looked barely old enough to shave. I told him what I had, proof that my son's death wasn't an accident. He nodded politely, then said he'd pass it along. I could tell from his tone that he thought I was just another heartbroken woman chasing ghosts. So I left. But I didn't give up. Instead, I called the one person I knew would listen, Detective Marisol Vega. She had worked with Mark years ago on a community charity project and had always admired his integrity. When I told her what I'd found, her voice sharpened. "Bring it to me. Don't talk to anyone else." We met at a small cafe by the edge of town. She came in wearing civilian clothes, her badge tucked out of sight. I slid the flash drive across the table, and she plugged it into her laptop. When Vanessa's voice came through the speakers, Marisol's expression hardened. "This is serious, Mrs. Dawson. If this is real, we're looking at premeditated murder." "It's real," I said. "A man died giving me that drive." Marisol nodded slowly. "Do you know who he was?" "Only that his name might have been Eric. He said Vanessa paid someone named Carlos to do it." She typed quickly, searching something on her encrypted tablet. "There's a Carlos Ramirez connected to that auto shop. He disappeared 2 days after the crash." I swallowed hard. "Then she's cleaning up." Marisol looked at me for a long time. "You need to be careful, Mrs. Dawson. If Vanessa knows you have this evidence, you could be in danger." I smiled bitterly. "Danger doesn't scare me anymore, Detective. Losing Mark already took the worst from me." That evening, I returned home to find my front door slightly open. My heart stopped. I stepped inside quietly, gripping the cane like a weapon. The living room was untouched, but the drawers in Mark's old room were open. Papers scattered on the floor. Someone had been looking for the flash drive. I checked the hiding spot where I'd kept the backup copy, inside a tin cookie box in the kitchen cupboard. Gone. My blood went cold. I called Marisol immediately. "They were here," I whispered. "They took the backup." "Leave the house," she said firmly. "Right now. Go somewhere safe. I'll send someone to check." I grabbed my purse, the original flash drive still in it, and headed to my neighbor Fatima's house. She was a retired nurse, sharp as a whip, and had been my closest friend for 20 years. When she saw my pale face, she didn't ask questions. She just opened the door and said, "You stay here tonight." Fatima made tea, the kind she used to brew for Mark when he was little and caught a cold. I told her everything, from the video to the break-in. She listened without interrupting, her eyes narrowing as the story unfolded. "That woman's dangerous," she said finally. "And if she's desperate, she'll come after you next." "I know," I said softly. "But I won't let her win." Fatima reached over, placing her hand on mine. "Then we fight smart. You're not alone." The next day, Marisol came by Fatima's house. She looked tired, her eyes shadowed. "You were right," she said. "We found Eric's body near Silver Lake. 2 bullets to the chest." My stomach twisted. "She killed him. We can't prove that yet. But the ballistics match a gun registered to Carlos Ramirez, the same man who's missing. So she used Carlos to do her dirty work, then got rid of him too," I said bitterly. Marisol sighed. "It's a mess. And without him, Vanessa can claim she's innocent, that the video's fabricated. I'll need more evidence." "Then we find it," I said firmly. "There has to be something left. Emails, phone records, something she overlooked." Marisol studied me for a moment, then smiled faintly. "You remind me of my mother. Stubborn as hell." "Good," I said. "It means I'm still alive." That night I couldn't sleep. The house creaked with every gust of wind, but it wasn't the noise that kept me awake. It was the image of Vanessa's calm face at the hospital, the way she'd said insurance before she said sorry. I sat by the window watching the rain and whispered, "Mark, help me. I don't know how to fight her, but I will. For Lily, for you." Just before dawn, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number appeared. "You should have stayed quiet, Margaret." My heart froze. I stared at the words until the screen dimmed. Then another message appeared, with a photo. Me, sitting by the window moments earlier, taken through the glass. I gripped the phone, my breath coming in sharp bursts. Whoever was behind that camera was close. Too close. I turned off the lights and crawled to the floor, my heart pounding in my ears. The shadows outside shifted, and for a moment, I thought I saw a figure standing by the oak tree near the driveway. Then, nothing. I realized then that this wasn't just about justice anymore. It was survival. And as the first light of morning crept over Silver Lake, I made myself a promise. I would not be the next to disappear. The sun rose behind a curtain of fog that morning, soft and gray, as if the world itself wanted to hide. I hadn't slept. Every sound outside made my heart race. The rustle of leaves, the snap of a twig, the whisper of rain sliding off the roof. Whoever had taken that photo knew where I lived, what window I sat by, what time I was awake. That wasn't a coincidence. It was a warning. Detective Marisol arrived just after 7, her car unmarked. She glanced at my pale face and the trembling mug of coffee in my hands. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I handed her my phone. "I think I have." Her eyes narrowed as she scrolled through the messages. "They're watching you," she murmured. That photo was taken from about 20 feet out. "Probably from the tree line," I nodded. "The oak tree." She stepped to the window, peering through the blinds. "We'll set up surveillance," she said. "But if they're this bold, you need to leave for a few days." "I'm not running," I said. "If I disappear, Vanessa wins. She'll twist the story again like she always does." Marisol turned to face me. "You're not running, you're surviving. There's a difference." She left 2 officers outside my property that night, their cars parked discreetly down the road. But even that didn't make me feel safe. I felt hunted. And deep down, I knew Vanessa wouldn't stop until she erased everything that could expose her. That afternoon, Fatima brought over soup and bread, pretending it was just a friendly visit. But I could see the fear in her eyes. "You should have gone with Marisol," she whispered. "I can't," I said softly. "If I leave, who'll protect what's left? The drive, the documents, everything Mark worked for." Fatima sighed and looked around the room. "Then promise me you'll keep the curtains closed. And don't open the door for anyone, no matter what," I promised. But by nightfall, promises felt fragile. Around midnight, I woke to the sound of gravel crunching outside. I froze, listening. The power flickered, then went out completely. The house fell into darkness. My breath quickened. I reached for the flashlight on the nightstand and crept toward the window. Through the thin slit in the curtains, I saw a shadow moving by the garage. A tall figure carrying something metallic, maybe a crowbar. My pulse thundered. I dialed Marisol's number with trembling fingers. "Detective Vega," her voice came, firm and alert. "Someone's outside," I whispered. "Near the garage. Stay inside. Lock the doors. I'm on my way." The call ended and the silence felt heavier than the dark. I tiptoed to the kitchen, my bare feet cold against the tile. The back door rattled. Once, twice, then stopped. I stood still, barely breathing. Then the door burst open with a crash. A man stepped in, hooded, his face hidden. I screamed and swung the flashlight, hitting him across the arm. He grunted, grabbed my wrist, and shoved me against the counter. "Where is it?" he hissed. "What?" "The flash drive!" I kicked, struggling, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. "I don't have it." He tightened his grip. "Don't lie to me, old woman." And then, a voice from outside. "Police." "Drop it!" Red and blue lights flooded the kitchen. The man cursed and bolted through the side door. 2 officers chased after him into the night. I collapsed against the counter, shaking, gasping for air. Marisol ran in moments later, her hand on her holster. "Margaret, are you hurt?" I shook my head. He knew about the drive. He knew everything. Marisol knelt beside me. "We'll get him. You did the right thing calling." But as she stood and looked around, her face darkened. They cut the power deliberately. This was planned. The officers didn't catch him. He vanished into the woods behind the house, leaving only muddy footprints and the smell of gasoline. When dawn broke, we found tire marks near the road, a black SUV with tinted windows. No license plate. Whoever sent him knew what they were doing, Marisol said grimly. He's not some random thug. He's trained. I sat on the porch steps, the morning wind cold against my face. Then Vanessa's desperate. She wouldn't risk this if she wasn't running out of time. Marisol nodded, which means we're close. That day, she placed me under temporary protection. I moved into a safe house on the edge of town, a small cabin owned by one of her retired colleagues. Isolated, quiet, surrounded by pine trees. It felt strange, like hiding in someone else's life. Still, the solitude gave me time to think. I kept replaying Vanessa's voice in that video. Cut the brakes. Make it look clean. It echoed through my mind until I realized something I'd missed before. She said, "He has an insurance policy that'll take care of everything." But Mark's policy wasn't life insurance. It was a business partnership clause. If he died, his shares in the company would transfer to the co-founder, Vanessa. That was it. The motive, I called Marisol immediately. Detective, she didn't just want him gone, she wanted control. Marisol was quiet for a moment. You're saying she killed him for ownership? Yes. If you check the company's filings after his death, I guarantee she took over full control. Marisol exhaled. That could be our leverage. I'll pull the records. Hours later, she called back, her voice tense. You were right. She signed the transfer papers 2 days after the crash. But there's more. She's preparing to sell the company to an overseas investor. A massive deal. Once that's done, she's gone. My hands tightened around the phone. Then we stop her before she disappears. Marisol hesitated. We don't have enough yet to arrest her. We need a direct confession or a witness. I looked out the window, the pine trees swaying under the wind. Then maybe I can make her confess. Margaret? No. She already thinks I'm scared, I interrupted. Let her believe it. I'll give her what she wants, a chance to gloat. Marisol's silence stretched for a long time before she finally said, If we do this, we do it my way. We'll wire you, monitor everything. But the moment she makes a move, you pull back. Understood? I nodded, though part of me knew there was no going back. That evening, I wrote Vanessa a message. I'm tired of running. Let's talk, you win. Meet me at the Silver Lake Chapel tomorrow at noon. It was the same chapel where we'd held Mark's funeral. As I pressed send, I felt both terror and relief. If this worked, I'd have the truth. And if it didn't, I'd finally see the woman who destroyed my son look me in the eye. I spent the night in silence, staring at Mark's photo on my phone. His easy smile, his kind eyes. I whispered, Tomorrow, son. Tomorrow we end this. Outside, the wind howled through the trees. Somewhere in that sound, I almost heard his voice. Steady, gentle, proud. When dawn broke over Silver Lake, I dressed in black and took the small cross Mark had made me years ago. As I slipped it around my neck, I felt a calm I hadn't felt in weeks. Tomorrow, there would be no more hiding. No more fear, only truth. The next morning felt like stepping into a memory I never wanted to relive. Silver Lake Chapel sat on the edge of town, wrapped in silence and early sunlight. The same wooden doors I'd walked through 6 months ago when we buried Mark now stood open, waiting. The wind carried the faint scent of lilies, the same flowers I'd placed beside his coffin. My stomach tightened. I arrived an hour early, as planned. Detective Marisol was already there, setting up surveillance in an unmarked van across the street. She handed me the small wire hidden inside a gold brooch. Keep it close to your heart, she said, her tone both literal and emotional. If she confesses, we'll have it. But remember, Margaret, you don't provoke her. Stay calm, I nodded. I've been calm for 6 months. That ends today. Marisol tried to smile, but the worry in her eyes betrayed her. We'll be listening. The moment you say the word mercy, we come in. The chapel was quiet, filled with the low hum of stained glass colors dancing across the pews. I took a seat in the front row, staring at the crucifix above the altar. Mark, I whispered, give me strength to face her. Minutes passed like hours. Then, the sound of heels echoed down the aisle, slow, confident, unhurried. I didn't need to look up to know it was her. Vanessa always moved like she owned the world, even when standing in its ruins. Margaret, she said smoothly, her voice dripping with false sweetness. You look. Well, I turned to face her. She was dressed in white, an almost cruel choice. Her blonde hair swept perfectly over her shoulder, her lips painted red. You came, I said quietly. Of course, she replied, sliding into the pew behind me. You said you wanted to talk. I was curious what you could possibly have left to say. I took a breath, steady and deliberate. You're selling the company, aren't you? Her eyes flickered just for a second. Oh, so you've been keeping tabs. Impressive. But yes, I am. It's business, nothing more. Business, I repeated softly. Like cutting brake lines is business. Her smile froze. Excuse me? I turned to face her fully now. You killed him, Vanessa. You had my son's car tampered with. You made it look like an accident. Her jaw tightened. For a moment, I saw the mask slip. Then she leaned back, chuckling softly. You've been talking to that detective too much. Grief makes people see ghosts, you know. I leaned closer. Grief made me see the truth. Her eyes darkened, and for the first time, her voice dropped its charm. You don't know what you're saying. I know everything, I whispered. The recording, the emails, the fake alibis. You thought you were careful, but you left trails, because arrogance always does. She stared at me, cold and calculating. Then she smiled again, almost pitying. You think anyone will believe you? An old woman trembling with loss? The world saw your son as reckless. That accident was his fault, not mine. I just let nature take its course. Nature? I hissed. You planned it. Her eyes gleamed. Maybe I did. Maybe I didn't. But what difference does it make now? He's gone, and I'm about to make more money than you can imagine. You should have stayed quiet, Margaret. You could have had a piece of it. Instead, you're sitting here with a wire under your dress. My blood ran cold. What did you say? She tilted her head. Did you really think I wouldn't check? My lawyer has friends in the department. I knew Marisol was listening. I froze. My fingers brushed the brooch instinctively, and she laughed. Go ahead, touch it. Wave to her. Maybe she'll save you before I finish what I started. Vanessa. Do you know what your son said before he died? She interrupted, stepping closer, her whisper like poison. He begged. He begged me to pull him out of the car. But I stood there. I watched him burn, I gasped, tears spilling before I could stop them. You monster, her smile widened. Now that's the reaction I wanted. She turned away, heading for the door. Tell your detective to make the most of her recording. Too bad it'll never reach court. Evidence disappears easily when money's involved. I couldn't let her leave. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to act. Vanessa! I shouted. She stopped. What? I stood, trembling but defiant. You won't win. You may erase files, but you can't erase what's coming. Truth has a way of finding the light. She tilted her head, mocking. Light won't save you now. At that moment, the chapel doors burst open. Marisol and 2 officers rushed in, guns drawn. Vanessa Price! You're under arrest for the murder of Mark Holloway. Vanessa laughed, raising her hand slowly. On what grounds? Marisol's eyes gleamed. Your confession, sweetheart. And this time it's all recorded. Did you really think we'd use the city line? That wire's not transmitting, it's recording. Vanessa's smile faltered. You, take her, Marisol ordered. As the officers handcuffed her, Vanessa turned to me, her eyes burning with hatred. You think this changes anything? I'll walk free. Money talks louder than your tears. Maybe, I whispered. But my son finally has a voice again, and it's louder than your greed. She spat on the floor as they dragged her out. When the doors closed behind her, my knees gave out. Marisol caught me before I fell. It's over, she said softly. She's done. But even as I tried to believe her, I saw the glint in Vanessa's eyes before she was taken away. That wasn't defeat. It was a promise. Back at the precinct hours later, Marisol showed me the footage. Every word Vanessa said in that chapel, every twisted confession, it was all there. Ironclad. You did it, she said, smiling faintly. You got her. I looked at the screen where Vanessa's face froze mid-smile. No, I said quietly. Not yet. That woman doesn't lose easily. She's planning something, Marisol sighed. Then we'll be ready. But as I drove back to the safe house that night, the sky heavy with thunder, I couldn't shake the feeling that something dark was still moving, something Vanessa left behind. And when I opened the door, I saw it. On the kitchen table sat a single white envelope. No name. No return address. Inside, a photo. It was me, standing in the chapel, holding the brooch. Written on the back, in red ink, were the words, Round 2. The The brooch slipped from my fingers and hit the floor with a sharp metallic echo that seemed to slice through the silence. My heart pounded. I realized then this wasn't over. It had just begun. I sat at the kitchen table for almost an hour, staring at that photograph as if it could blink. The words written on the back, "Round 2, bled into my mind like a poison, slow and deliberate. My hands trembled, not from fear anymore, but from something darker, something that felt like fury waking up inside me. Vanessa might have been arrested, but her reach stretched far beyond prison walls. I knew it now. She wasn't alone in this. She had allies, money, and secrets buried deep enough to choke a forest. When Detective Marisol arrived, her face went pale at the sight of the envelope. She picked it up with a glove, studying the ink. "This isn't her handwriting," she said softly. "Too clean. Too structured," I nodded. "Then it's someone working for her." Marisol paced the room. "We transferred Vanessa to the county jail this morning. No visitors allowed, no calls permitted until arraignment. Whoever sent this is either on the inside, or someone she prepared for moments like this." I could feel the walls closing in. "She's still playing," I whispered. "Even from a cage she's playing." Marisol's eyes softened. "I'll assign someone to stay outside your house again. And Margaret, you don't leave this property until I say so. Promise me," I promised. But promises, I was learning, didn't keep people safe. Actions did. After Marisol left, I went to my son's old study. Dust covered everything. His blueprints, his notebooks, the half-burned photo of him and Vanessa laughing at the lake. It felt like stepping into a mausoleum. I ran my fingers over his handwriting on a notepad, a list of upcoming projects, delivery schedules, and at the bottom, a single word circled twice. Aurora. It wasn't a name I recognized, but I remembered hearing Mark mention it once before the accident. "Aurora's the backup," he'd said when I asked about his files. I hadn't thought much of it then. Now, the memory hit like lightning. A backup. That meant there was more evidence, something he'd hidden. I tore through the shelves, drawers, even the floorboards. Nothing. Then, when I lifted his old lamp, a small metal key slid out from underneath, taped to the base. Written in tiny black ink were the words, "Aurora Unit 23. My heart raced. A storage unit. That had to be it. By the next morning, I was at the Silver Pine storage facility, tucked behind the industrial park on the edge of town. The place smelled of rust and dust. The manager, a weary-looking man named Chuck, squinted at the tag on the key. "Unit 23? That one's been paid up for years. Automatic renewal under the name M. Holloway. You his mother?" "Yes," I said quietly. He shrugged. "Take your time, ma'am. I'll be in the office." The padlock clicked open with ease. The door rolled up, groaning under its weight. Inside was a small, dimly lit space, shelves lined with boxes, a workbench, and an old computer tower covered in dust. I turned on my phone's flashlight and stepped inside. There were files, dozens of them. Contracts, company memos, invoices marked confidential. But what caught my eye was a single envelope taped to the wall. On the front, in Mark's handwriting, were the words, "If something happens to me, show this to the police." My breath caught. I opened it carefully. Inside was a USB drive. I slid it into my laptop right there on the workbench. The screen flickered, then displayed a folder labeled Aurora. Inside, there were video clips, time-stamped meetings, hidden camera footage, and audio files labeled with dates. My stomach twisted as I recognized Vanessa's voice in several of them, discussing payouts, bribes, and threats. This wasn't just evidence of one murder. It was an empire of corruption. But before I could finish watching, I heard footsteps. Slow, heavy, approaching the unit door. I froze. The metal handle rattled once. Then again, "Who's there?" I called out, my voice cracking. No answer. Just the low creak of the hinges as the door began to rise. Inch by inch, the light from outside cut across the floor, and then I saw the shadow. Tall, broad, unmistakably male. I slammed the laptop shut, stuffed the USB into my pocket, and reached for the heavy wrench on the workbench. Don't come any closer, I warned. A deep voice answered, calm and cold. Mrs. Holloway, you need to come with me. Who are you? Let's just say, a friend of Vanessa's. My pulse spiked. I bolted for the side door, but he lunged forward, grabbing my arm. I swung the wrench, hitting his shoulder. He grunted in pain, but didn't let go. I screamed, twisting, and kicked him in the shin. He stumbled, giving me just enough time to break free. I ran out into the sunlight, down the narrow corridor between storage units. My lungs burned. Behind me, his footsteps thundered. Stop running! He shouted, but I didn't stop. I turned a sharp corner and nearly collided with Chuck, the manager. Call the police! I yelled. Before he could react, the man burst out from behind me. Chuck froze, wide-eyed. The stranger turned, glared, and disappeared into the back lot before sirens filled the air. The officers arrived within minutes. They took statements, searched the area, but he was gone, like smoke. Marisol showed up shortly after, her jaw tight with fury. You went out alone, she said. I found the drive, I whispered, handing her the USB. It's all there. Everything Mark tried to protect. Her eyes softened. You did good, Margaret. Reckless, but good. That night she took the drive to the precinct. I tried to sleep, but the image of that man's shadow burned behind my eyelids. He'd said, a friend of Vanessa's. That meant her network was still alive, moving pieces for her even as she sat behind bars. At 3 a.m, my phone buzzed. No caller ID. I hesitated, then answered. A voice whispered, distorted and hollow. You should have left it where you found it. The line went dead. I sat there, gripping the phone, heart pounding. For the first time, I realized this wasn't just revenge anymore. This was war. Vanessa had started it, but I was going to end it, no matter the cost. I looked at Mark's photo on the mantel, his warm smile frozen in time. You hid the truth, son, I murmured. Now it's my turn to bring it into the light. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. The rain began to fall, soft at first, then harder, as if the sky itself was cleansing the earth of what was coming. I turned off the lights, locked the doors, and whispered to the darkness. Round 2 it is. The morning sun crept through the thin curtains, painting golden lines across the floorboards. Emma sat by the window, staring blankly at the letter in her hands, the one Daniel had written weeks before he left but never mailed. It had been tucked inside his Bible between the pages of Matthew, and when she found it, her hands trembled as if holding something sacred. Her heart raced, afraid of what it might say, or what it might not. She hesitated, her fingers brushing over his handwriting. Emma, it began simply, but that one word already broke her. It wasn't the neat, confident script she remembered from the man who used to leave love notes on the refrigerator. It was shaky, uneven, almost desperate. She unfolded the paper carefully, the edges worn and stained, and began to read. He wrote, If you're reading this, it means I didn't find the courage to give it to you. I've been fighting something inside me, something I can't name. I've tried to pray it away, to smile through it. But the truth is, I feel empty, Emma. I see you trying so hard, loving me through the cracks, and I hate that I keep letting you down. Her vision blurred. Every word cut through her chest. She had known he was struggling. The silence, the late nights, the way he'd stare at the ceiling instead of sleeping. But she never knew it ran this deep. He continued, I keep hearing the pastor say that God's love covers everything. But what if I've run too far? What if the darkness I've let in is too heavy to forgive? I know I should talk to you, but I don't want you to see me like this. Lost, broken, afraid of my own thoughts. She stopped reading, her tears falling onto the ink, smudging his words. For a moment, the world outside seemed to fade, the sound of children playing in the street, the distant hum of traffic. All of it disappeared. It was just her, the letter, and the echo of a man she once knew. Emma clutched the paper to her chest and whispered, Oh, Daniel, why didn't you let me carry it with you? Because that was the thing about love. It was never meant to be carried alone. She remembered how he used to hum hymns in the kitchen, his voice warm and low, filling their small house with peace. She remembered how he'd hold her hand at church, squeezing it gently whenever the sermon hit too close to home. And now, sitting there with the letter pressed to her heart, she realized he had been fighting a war she couldn't see, one between faith and fear, hope and despair. That afternoon, she walked to the church, the letter still in her hand. Pastor John was cleaning near the altar when she entered. His kind eyes lifted to meet hers, and without a word he knew. She handed him the letter, and he read it silently. When he looked back up, his face was heavy with compassion. "Emma," he said softly, "sometimes the people who smile the most are the ones hurting the deepest." She nodded, her throat tight. "He thought he'd failed God," she whispered. "He thought he'd failed me." The pastor sighed, folding the letter. The enemy loves to whisper lies like that, to make us believe we're too far gone. But Daniel's story isn't over, not if God still holds it. Those words lingered in her mind long after she left the church. That night, as rain began to fall, Emma stood by the window again. The world outside blurred behind streaks of water, and in that quiet, she prayed. Not for Daniel to return, but for peace to find him wherever he was. "God," she whispered, "if he's still wandering, let him know he's loved. Let him know he's forgiven." Her voice cracked, but it carried. Miles away, Daniel sat in the corner of a dim motel room. The letter he'd written, or rather its missing twin, haunted him. He had written several versions, none of which he'd sent. He thought leaving would spare her pain, but now he understood he'd only deepened it. He picked up a pen and began again. "Emma," he wrote, "I don't know if you can ever forgive me. I ran because I thought I was protecting you from me. From my failures, my doubts, my fear that God had turned away. But every day I see your face in my mind, and I hear your voice in my prayers. I want to come home. I just don't know how?" He paused, staring at the page as if it might answer him. The rain tapped gently against the window, rhythmic and soft, like the sound of her heartbeat against his chest from years ago. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in months, he whispered a prayer. Not perfect, not rehearsed, but real. "Lord, if there's still mercy for me, show me the way back." It wasn't eloquent, but heaven didn't need eloquence. Heaven only needed honesty. The next morning, Daniel folded the letter, tucked it into his jacket pocket, and stepped outside. The sky was still gray, the air heavy with the scent of wet asphalt, but something inside him had shifted, a flicker of light in the fog. As he began walking toward the bus station, he didn't know what awaited him. He didn't know if Emma would even open the door. But he knew one thing. He couldn't keep running from Grace. Back home, Emma felt something stir within her heart, a quiet conviction that this wasn't the end. She didn't understand it, but she felt it, deep and steady like a pulse. She looked again at his letter, then placed it back inside the Bible, exactly where she found it. "You'll come home," she whispered. "Not because I want you to, but because God isn't done with us yet." And as the rain fell harder, the wind rustled through the trees, almost like a voice saying, "Be still. I'm working even in the silence." The bus rumbled through the countryside as Daniel sat by the window, watching the world blur by. Raindrops slid down the glass, mirroring the tears he didn't want to admit were there. Every bump on the road reminded him how far he'd gone, not just from home, but from everything that once gave him peace. The town signs grew familiar the closer he got, and so did the ache in his chest. He had left with anger and shame, but now all he carried was a deep, aching longing to make things right. He hadn't planned how he'd face Emma. He didn't know what words could possibly heal the wounds he'd caused. But the letter in his pocket gave him courage. It wasn't perfect, just like him, but it was honest. That had to be enough. As the bus slowed at the small town station, Daniel stood, his hands trembling slightly. The sky had cleared, revealing streaks of soft gold through the clouds. It felt symbolic, almost like grace itself was breaking through. He stepped off the bus, the air crisp, the familiar scent of wet pine and fresh soil surrounding him. Every step toward home felt heavier, but also sacred. as though God himself walked beside him. Emma was in the backyard, hanging laundry, when she heard the sound of gravel crunching beneath slow, hesitant footsteps. She turned expecting to see a neighbor. But the moment her eyes landed on him, her breath caught. Daniel stood there, thinner, older, weary, but his eyes were different. They weren't empty anymore. They carried something she hadn't seen in a long time: humility, hope, and the faint glimmer of life. Neither spoke for a few seconds. The silence stretched between them, filled with every unsaid apology, every night of wondering, every unanswered prayer. Finally, he broke the silence. "I didn't know if you'd want to see me," he said, his voice rough, almost breaking. Emma's throat tightened. She wanted to speak, but her emotions tangled like a knot. So instead, she stepped closer. "I read your letter," she whispered. His eyes widened, guilt flickering in them. "The one you left in your Bible," she continued. "You should have given it to me, Daniel." His shoulders dropped. "I was afraid you'd see how broken I was." She nodded slowly, tears forming. "I already saw it," she said softly. "I just wished you'd trusted me enough to let me hold it with you." For a moment, neither moved. Then Emma took another step forward, close enough to smell the faint scent of rain on his jacket. "You came back," she said quietly. "Why now?" He swallowed hard, his voice trembling. "Because I realized running didn't save me. It only buried me deeper. I thought I'd lost everything, you, my faith, my worth. But even when I tried to forget, I couldn't shake the feeling that God wasn't done. And I think..." He led me back here. Tears slipped down her cheeks. She wanted to stay strong, to keep her heart guarded. But love doesn't always ask for logic. It just aches until it's healed. "I prayed for you every night," she said. "Not for you to come back, but for peace to find you." He nodded, his eyes glistening. "It did," he said softly. "And it brought me here." The air between them shifted, still fragile but filled with something sacred. Emma finally said, "Come inside, Daniel." And when he stepped over the threshold, it felt like crossing from death into life. The house hadn't changed much. The old cross still hung on the wall, the smell of cinnamon and coffee lingered in the air, and the worn Bible still sat open on the table, right where he used to read from. He stood there silently, as if afraid to disturb the memory. "I don't deserve this," he murmured. "But I'm grateful." Emma looked at him gently. "Grace doesn't wait for you to deserve it," she said. "It just waits for you to accept it." They sat at the table, a long, heavy silence between them. Not hostile, just full of emotion too deep for words. Finally, Emma asked, "Where have you been all this time?" He sighed, rubbing his hands together. "Nowhere good," he admitted. "I worked odd jobs, moved from one place to another. Every night I'd tell myself I was fine, but inside I was crumbling. I kept hearing your voice, not accusing, just praying. That's what brought me back. Your love and God's mercy, they wouldn't let me stay lost." Her tears returned, quiet and constant. "You broke me when you left," she whispered. "But maybe God used that breaking to rebuild something stronger." Daniel reached into his pocket, pulling out the new letter, the one he wrote in the motel. "This was supposed to be my last letter," he said. "But maybe it's the start of something new." He handed it to her. She hesitated, then opened it. The words were simple, raw, and pure. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for a chance to live differently, to love better, to believe again. I want to find my way home, not just to this house, but to your heart and to God." Emma wiped her eyes, then looked up at him. "Daniel," she said softly, "if you're truly ready to walk that path, I'll walk it with you. But this time, no more silence. No more running. We fight together," he nodded, tears falling freely now. "Together," he said, and the word sounded like redemption. Outside, the evening sun broke through the clouds, flooding the room with warm light. It wasn't just sunlight. It felt like grace filling every corner. Emma stood, walked to the window, and whispered a quiet prayer of thanks. Behind her, Daniel bowed his head, the weight of guilt slowly lifting from his shoulders. They didn't know what tomorrow would bring. There would still be hard days, tears, and moments of doubt. But for the first time in a long while, they weren't facing them alone. As night fell, Daniel sat by the fireplace, holding Emma's hand. The flames flickered, dancing across their faces, and in that soft glow, something sacred settled. Forgiveness. In the stillness, he whispered, "I thought God had turned his face from me." Emma squeezed his hand gently. "He never did," she said. "You just stopped looking his way." But he was always waiting. Daniel closed his eyes, a tear sliding down his cheek. "Then I'm home," he whispered. And for the first time in years, peace, real, quiet, undeserved peace, filled the room. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the curtains like gentle fingers waking a forgotten soul. The smell of coffee drifted through the house, and Daniel opened his eyes slowly, unsure for a moment if all of yesterday had been a dream. But then he heard the faint sound of Emma humming in the kitchen, the same melody she used to sing when life was still whole. He sat up, his chest heavy with both gratitude and guilt. The room felt different now. It wasn't just a space, it was mercy made visible. When he walked into the kitchen, Emma looked up, surprised but calm. Her smile was soft, cautious. "Coffee?" she asked. He nodded. "Please." She poured him a cup, and for a moment, it felt like time folded back on itself. Two people who had loved, hurt, and survived sitting together again at the same worn table. But beneath the quiet warmth lay unspoken truths, the kind that take time to heal. Daniel broke the silence first. "I didn't sleep much," he said, stirring his coffee. "Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the mess I made." Emma sighed, not with annoyance, but with the weary compassion of someone who's already fought that battle herself. "You can't change the past, Daniel. You can only decide what kind of man you'll be now." He nodded, looking down at his hands. "I don't even know where to start." "Start small," she said simply. "Start with today." Her words settled deep in him, like seeds finding fertile ground. He looked up, meeting her eyes. "Then today, I'll make things right, even if it's just one thing." That afternoon, Daniel walked down to the old church on Pine Street. The wooden steps creaked beneath his boots, the same way they always had. The doors were open, sunlight pouring through the stained glass windows, painting the pews in colors that seemed to whisper hope. Father Thomas stood near the altar, arranging hymnals. When he turned and saw Daniel, surprise flashed across his face, followed by something warmer. "Well," he said softly, "look who Grace brought home." Daniel tried to speak, but emotion tightened his throat. "I don't know if I belong here anymore," he finally said. Father Thomas walked closer. "You never stopped belonging. You just forgot where you were welcome." Daniel swallowed hard. "I've done things I can't undo." "That's true," Father Thomas said gently. "But forgiveness isn't about undoing. It's about releasing, so you can walk again without chains." Tears burned Daniel's eyes. "How do I even begin?" "By surrendering," the priest said. "Not to despair, but to grace." They prayed together, Daniel's hands trembling as he whispered the words. For the first time in years, the silence between each sentence didn't feel empty. It felt sacred. He left the church lighter, though the road ahead was still uncertain. That evening, he found Emma sitting on the porch, watching the sunset. "You went to see Father Thomas," she said, her tone not questioning but knowing. He nodded. "I had to. I've spent too long talking to myself. It was time I listened to God instead." Emma looked at him quietly, the soft orange glow reflecting in her eyes. "You know," she said, "I used to sit right here and beg God to change you. But somewhere along the way, I realized he was changing me too." Daniel's brow furrowed slightly. "Changing you?" She nodded. "Yes. Teaching me that love doesn't mean enabling someone's darkness. Sometimes it means stepping back and letting them face the truth alone, even if it breaks you." Her voice cracked slightly. "And it did, Daniel. It broke me." He reached for her hand, hesitating before his fingers brushed hers. "I know. I saw the pieces I left behind, and I hate that I put them there. Emma didn't pull away. You can't hate yourself forever. That's not repentance. That's punishment. And God doesn't need another sacrifice. He needs surrender. Daniel took a deep breath. Then I surrender. They sat there for a while, the porch creaking under their weight, the evening air cool and clean. The sound of crickets filled the pauses. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang, marking the hour. After a long silence, Emma asked, "Do you still have the locket I gave you?" Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out the small silver locket, worn and scratched. Inside was a faded picture of them, smiling, younger, unbroken. "I carried it everywhere," he said. "Even when I didn't deserve to," she smiled faintly. "You still don't," she teased gently. "But maybe that's the point of grace." He chuckled softly, the first genuine laugh she'd heard from him in years. It felt strange, yet right, like laughter in a house that hadn't known joy in too long. Days turned into weeks. Slowly, the walls between them began to fall. Daniel helped around the house, fixed the fence, mowed the yard, even started attending church again. He didn't do these things to prove himself. He did them because he wanted to live differently. One afternoon, he found Emma in the garden, pulling weeds. "You still love these flowers, huh?" he said, kneeling beside her. "They're stubborn," she replied with a soft smile. "Kind of like us," he laughed. "Maybe that's why they survive every storm." Then, after a pause, he added, "Emma, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you think God can really make something beautiful out of all this?" She looked up at him, her hands covered in soil, her face glowing in the sunlight. "He already is," she said. "Look around. You're home, you're alive, and you're not who you used to be. That's beauty, Daniel. You just haven't learned to see it yet." Her words stayed with him long after the day ended. That night he sat on the porch alone, staring at the stars. He whispered a quiet prayer, not for forgiveness this time, but for strength. The strength to keep choosing the light, even when darkness still called his name. Inside, Emma watched from the window. She didn't interrupt. She knew this was sacred work, the kind that happens in silence, between a broken man and a merciful God. For the first time in years, she felt peace, not because everything was perfect, but because hope had finally come home. The clock ticked softly in the background as Daniel whispered, "Thank you, Lord, for not giving up on me." And from somewhere beyond the stars, Grace whispered back, "Welcome home, my son." It was a quiet Tuesday morning when the peace they'd been rebuilding began to tremble. The air was soft and golden, the kind that made everything look almost holy. Yet beneath that calm was a storm neither Daniel nor Emma saw coming. Daniel was outside mending the gate when he heard the crunch of tires on gravel. He looked up and froze. A sleek gray sedan had pulled into the driveway, and stepping out of it was a woman he hadn't seen in years, Cynthia, the person who had once been the final wound in a long chain of destruction. For a moment, Daniel thought his eyes deceived him. But when she took off her sunglasses, there was no denying it. Time had changed her, the confident smile now replaced by a nervous tremor, the arrogance by fatigue. She looked smaller somehow, as if guilt had carved away her strength. Emma appeared on the porch, holding a dish towel, her expression shifting from curiosity to concern. "Daniel?" she called, noticing his stillness. When she followed his gaze, the towel slipped from her fingers. "Hello, Emma," Cynthia said softly, her voice trembling. "And you too, Daniel." The sound of her voice dragged up memories Daniel had fought for years to bury. The affair, the betrayal, the lies that had ripped his marriage apart. His throat tightened, his heartbeat pounding like war drums. "Why are you here?" he finally asked, his tone sharper than he intended. Cynthia took a hesitant step forward. "Because I had nowhere else to go," she said. "And because I need to tell you something." Emma's jaw clenched. Every instinct told her to protect the fragile peace they'd worked so hard to rebuild. "You should leave," she said quietly. "You've done enough damage," Cynthia nodded slowly, tears already pooling in her eyes. I deserve that, she whispered. But please, just hear me out. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. Daniel looked at Emma, torn between anger and the pull of compassion. He could see the conflict in his wife's eyes, too. Forgiveness was a hard road, and this was one step she hadn't been prepared for. Finally, Emma nodded stiffly. 5 minutes, she said. They sat on the porch. The silence was heavy, the air thick with history. Cynthia clasped her hands tightly. I don't expect forgiveness, she began. I just need you to know the truth. The reason I disappeared wasn't because I didn't care. It was because I was pregnant. The words hit Daniel like a punch to the chest. Pregnant? He repeated, his voice breaking. She nodded. Yes, with your child. Emma gasped softly, her hands flying to her mouth. Daniel's world tilted, spinning between disbelief and dread. That's not possible, he said. You would have told me. I tried, she said, crying now. But when I finally got the courage, I learned you had left town. And I was too ashamed to face Emma, so I raised the baby alone, for 3 years. Until last month. Emma's voice was barely a whisper. Until last month? Cynthia nodded, her tears falling freely. He got sick, Emma, a heart condition. I spent every dollar I had trying to save him, but it wasn't enough. He passed away 2 weeks ago. The porch went silent except for the faint sound of wind rustling the trees. Daniel's eyes filled with tears, his heart aching for a child he'd never known. Why are you telling us this now? He asked quietly. Because I need to let go, she said. And because before he died, he asked about his father. He wanted to know if his daddy loved him. I couldn't lie. I told him yes, that his father was a good man who just lost his way. Daniel's chest heaved as emotion surged through him. Shame, grief, and something else. Sorrow too deep for words. He looked at Emma, but she wasn't angry. She looked broken, stunned, but her eyes were full of compassion. Cynthia reached into her purse and pulled out a small locket, silver, tarnished, with a tiny photo inside. This was his favorite, she said, handing it to Daniel. His hands shook as he opened it. Inside was the face of a little boy, dark hair, brown eyes, a smile hauntingly familiar. He looks like you, Emma whispered. Daniel's tears fell freely now. He closed the locket, clutching it to his chest. I didn't deserve to know him, he said. Cynthia shook her head. None of us deserve the pain we caused. But maybe, if there's still mercy left in the world, this truth can free us. Emma stood slowly, her face pale, but her eyes steady. Cynthia, she said softly, you broke something sacred. But maybe God can still use your pain for good. I don't know how, but I believe he can. Cynthia sobbed quietly, nodding. I hope so. I've been sober for 2 years, trying to rebuild what's left of me. And now that he's gone, I needed to say it out loud before it eats me alive. Emma walked over and placed a hand on her shoulder. You said what you needed to. Now it's time to let go, Cynthia nodded, wiping her eyes. Thank you, both of you. She turned to Daniel. For what it's worth, he would have loved you. You were his hero, even if he never met you. When she left, the silence that followed was almost unbearable. Daniel stood on the porch long after her car disappeared down the road, holding the locket so tightly it left a mark on his palm. Emma joined him, slipping her arm around his waist. She's gone, she said softly. He nodded, his voice breaking. But a part of me just met a son I never knew I had, and lost him in the same breath. Emma laid her head against his shoulder. Then mourn him, she whispered. Grieve and then let grace do what it does best, heal. They stood there together, the sky slowly fading into dusk. The world around them was still, almost reverent, as if even creation paused to honor the grief of a broken man finding his way through forgiveness. Later that night, Daniel placed the locket beside the cross on the mantel. He lit a candle and whispered a prayer, not of anger or guilt, but of surrender. Father, he said, voice trembling, thank you for letting me know him even this way, and thank you for the mercy I don't deserve. Emma came up behind him, slipping her hand into his. We'll carry him together, she said. Every prayer, every tear together. Daniel nodded, tears streaming freely. Together, he whispered again. And in that fragile moment, beneath the flicker of candlelight, the ruins of their past began to glow. Not with shame, but with redemption. The night before the court hearing was the heaviest of Ethan's life. Rain poured down like it had been waiting for that moment, like heaven itself was grieving. The farmhouse creaked in the wind, and every sound felt like a question he couldn't answer. He sat by the window, watching the storm roll over the fields, clutching the old photo of his father, his mother, and little Noah, back when life was whole. His hands trembled, not just from fear, but from the ache of knowing that tomorrow could change everything forever. Martha came in quietly, her face lit only by the soft glow of the oil lamp. She'd aged years and months. The woman who once filled the house with warmth now moved like a shadow, fragile, yet somehow still holding everyone together. "You haven't eaten," she said softly. Ethan shook his head. "I can't, not tonight." She placed a trembling hand on his shoulder. "You're doing the right thing, son. No matter what they say tomorrow, you're doing what your father would have wanted." He wanted to believe her, but doubt gnawed at him. The world didn't work in ideals anymore. It was run by people who twisted truth into whatever suited them best. And the man who'd built his father's company from ashes, Mr. Caldwell, was one of them. Ethan knew that tomorrow, Caldwell would stand in that courtroom with his expensive suit and charming lies, painting Ethan as reckless, unstable, even dangerous. And yet Ethan wasn't fighting for power. He was fighting for his father's name, for the truth that his dad's death wasn't just a tragic accident, but something far darker. At midnight, Ethan stepped outside. The rain had slowed to a whisper, and the smell of wet earth filled the air. He closed his eyes and whispered, "God, I don't know if you still hear me. But if you do, give me the strength to face whatever comes. I can't do this alone." For the first time in months, he didn't ask for victory. He asked for courage, and somehow that made him feel lighter. Morning came gray and cold. The courthouse loomed ahead like a monument of judgment. As Ethan walked up the stone steps, every whisper felt like a dagger. The media had twisted everything. Reporters followed him, shouting questions about embezzlement and family betrayal. His mother's trembling hand gripped his arm, and he shielded her as they entered the hall. Inside, the tension was suffocating. Caldwell sat across the room, his smile sharp as glass. His lawyer whispered something, and both men laughed quietly. Ethan's lawyer, Mr. Rayner, leaned in. "Stay calm. Speak only when asked. Don't let him provoke you." Ethan nodded, though his heart pounded like a drum. The hearing began. Caldwell's side opened with a show. Polished words, carefully arranged evidence, and witnesses who'd been bought long ago. Each one painted Ethan as irrational, accusing him of forging signatures, of trying to claim company assets that weren't his. The lies piled high like stones on his chest. When his turn came, Ethan stood, gripping the edge of the wooden stand until his knuckles went white. "My father didn't fall from that bridge by accident," he said. He was on his way to expose corruption inside Caldwell Industries, his own company. And the men who stood to lose everything made sure his voice was silenced. Gasps rippled through the room. Caldwell's calm expression flickered, just for a second. "That's an outrageous claim," his lawyer snapped. But Ethan pressed on. "I have proof. Letters my father wrote before he died. Hidden accounts. Transactions that point directly to Caldwell." He turned to the judge. He thought the truth could change things. That's why he kept records. And now I'm here, risking everything to make sure his truth isn't buried with him. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Lawyers objecting, reporters scribbling, people whispering like fire through dry grass. But Ethan stood tall. For the first time, he wasn't afraid of losing. Because this wasn't about winning anymore. It was about finally letting the truth breathe. Hours later, after the closing arguments, the judge called for a recess. Ethan stepped outside, his pulse racing. He didn't know what the verdict would be, but something had already changed. The crowd that once looked at him with suspicion now looked at him with something else. doubt in Caldwell's story. Maybe even belief. Martha found him by the fountain outside the courthouse. She reached up, her hand cupping his cheek. "Your father would be proud," she whispered. Ethan closed his eyes, fighting the tears that burned behind them. "I just hope I did enough." Before he could speak again, Caldwell himself walked out. For a moment, the two men stood face to face. The older man's mask had cracked. There was no charm left, only fury. "You think this changes anything?" he hissed. "You don't know how deep this goes." Ethan didn't flinch. Maybe not. But truth has a way of coming to light. And it's already started. Caldwell's jaw tightened. "You'll regret this." Ethan took a breath. "Maybe, but I'd rather regret fighting for what's right than live my life wondering why I didn't." That night, the storm returned. But this time, Ethan didn't see it as a sign of despair. He stood at the window again, watching lightning split the horizon. The world outside was still violent, uncertain, unforgiving, but inside there was peace. The kind that comes when you've finally stopped running from what's true. Hours later, his phone buzzed. It was Rayner. "Ethan," he said, voice low, almost shaking. "The judge reviewed the new evidence. They're reopening the investigation into your father's death. Caldwell's team is under audit. You did it, son. You did it." Ethan sank into his chair, breath trembling, heart pounding. For the first time in years, he felt like he could breathe. But even in that moment of fragile victory, he knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Caldwell was powerful. The system was deep. There would be more battles. But now, he wasn't just a broken man trying to survive. He was a son standing in the light of his father's truth. Outside, dawn began to break through the clouds, streaks of gold pushing through gray. Ethan whispered, "Thank you." Not to anyone visible, but to the quiet presence that had carried him through the storm. And as the first light touched his face, he realized something that changed everything. Sometimes, God doesn't stop the storm. He stands beside you until it passes. Tomorrow, the fight would continue. But for tonight, for the first time in a long, long time, Ethan allowed himself to rest. The morning after the hearing, the whole town buzzed like a stirred beehive. Headlines screamed, "Caldwell under investigation," and hidden accounts uncovered in sudden court twist. Reporters swarmed the courthouse steps, hungry for answers, but Ethan stayed away from the noise. He wasn't chasing fame or revenge. He was chasing peace. Yet deep down, he knew it wasn't over. The truth had cracked the shell, but darkness always fought hardest when cornered. He drove back to the farmhouse in silence. The sun broke through the clouds, lighting up the muddy fields. For the first time in months, it looked like life again. Soft golden hues spilling across the earth, promising that spring might come after all. Martha stood on the porch, her hands clasped as if she'd been praying. When she saw him, she smiled, though her eyes were rimmed with sleeplessness. "The papers came," she said softly, holding up a stack of envelopes. "Some are from reporters, some from people who worked for Caldwell. They say they have stories to tell." Ethan's breath caught. "People are talking?" "Yes," she said, nodding. "People who were afraid before, they are not anymore." That night, Ethan sat by the old dining table, the same one where his father used to read them bedtime stories about courage and faith. The wood was scratched and worn, but under the lamplight it felt sacred. One by one he opened the letters. Inside were testimonies, workers who'd seen Caldwell falsify safety records, accountants who'd been pressured to cover up losses, engineers who'd quit after raising concerns. The more he read, the heavier it got. It wasn't just corruption. It was cruelty. Families had lost everything, and his father had tried to make it right. By midnight, Ethan pushed the papers aside and leaned back. His mind swirled with anger, sorrow, and awe. His father hadn't died a fool, he'd died a fighter. And now, it was Ethan's turn to carry that torch, no matter how much it burned. The next morning, he called Rayner. "I have more evidence," he said. "Enough to bring everything down." Rayner hesitated. "Ethan, you need to be careful. Caldwell has friends in high places. You're putting yourself in danger. I know, Ethan said, his voice steady. But I can't back down now. By noon, the farmhouse driveway filled with cars. Journalists, whistleblowers, former employees, all of them came, drawn by something bigger than one man's fight. Ethan stepped out onto the porch and looked at them. I'm not here to destroy anyone, he said, voice carrying over the wind. I'm here to tell the truth. For my father and for everyone who's been silenced. But if we do this, we do it right. With facts, not fury. With faith, not hate. A hush fell over the crowd. One older man stepped forward, a retired foreman who had worked with Ethan's father for years. Your dad once told me, he said, voice trembling, that light doesn't ask permission to shine. It just does. You keep shining, son. We've got your back. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. Every creak of the old house sounded like footsteps. Every shadow made his pulse quicken. He wasn't paranoid. He knew Caldwell's reach. And he was right to be afraid. Just past midnight, headlights appeared down the dirt road. A black car stopped near the gate. Ethan peered through the window, heart pounding. Two men stepped out, not locals. They stood there for a while, just watching the house. Then one of them took out his phone, spoke briefly, and got back in the car. The engine roared, and they disappeared into the night. Ethan exhaled, trying to calm his shaking hands. He knew what it meant. Caldwell was warning him. But that fear only turned into resolve. He wasn't that broken man anymore. He was ready to face whatever darkness came. The next day, the investigation spread fast. News channels picked up the story. Caldwell Industries' stock plummeted. The board called for an emergency meeting. Whistleblowers came forward publicly, naming names, sharing documents. It was chaos. But it was righteous chaos, the kind that happens when truth finally breaks free. Then came the moment Ethan didn't expect. Caldwell himself called. His voice was calm, almost too calm. You've caused quite the storm, he said. But storms pass. People forget. I can make this all go away, for you and your mother. Ethan's jaw tightened. You mean hush money? I mean peace, Caldwell said smoothly. You walk away and I'll make sure your family is taken care of, forever. No threats. No lawsuits, just peace. Ethan's hand trembled around the phone. He could almost see the life Caldwell was offering. Safety, comfort, silence. But it was built on lies, and he'd already lost too much to go back. My peace doesn't come from you, Ethan said finally. It comes from truth. And if that costs me everything, so be it. Caldwell laughed, cold and hollow. Then you've chosen your fate. The line went dead. Ethan stared at the phone, feeling a strange mix of fear and freedom. For years, he'd lived under the weight of shame and doubt. But now he felt something else rising inside him. Conviction. That evening, he gathered the town in the old church. The pews filled quickly, faces he'd known all his life, faces that had watched his family fall and now watched him rise. When he stepped up to the pulpit, the room fell silent. My father once told me, he began, voice steady, that truth is like fire. It burns, it hurts, but it also purifies. And I believe that's what's happening now. We've all been afraid of losing our jobs, our names, our comfort. But we've already lost too much hiding in silence. It's time to stand. People nodded, some with tears in their eyes. An elderly woman in the front pew whispered, Amen. Ethan took a deep breath. I don't know what tomorrow will bring, but I do know this. No lie can outlast the light. So whatever happens, keep standing. Keep believing. And don't let fear decide your story. When he stepped down, the room erupted in applause, not out of excitement, but relief. The kind that comes when people realize they're not alone anymore. That night, as he walked home under the stars, Martha took his hand. You've become the man your father prayed you'd be, she said softly. Ethan looked up at the sky, tears catching the moonlight. No, Mom, he whispered. I've just finally learned to believe what he believed, that God's truth doesn't need to be defended. It just needs to be lived. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of rain and hope. Somewhere deep inside, Ethan felt that the hardest part was still ahead. But now he wasn't afraid. Because the truth that burns brightest isn't the one shouted loudest. It's the one that survives the fire. 3 months passed since the night the truth erupted, and life in Maplewood changed in quiet, almost sacred ways. The town that once whispered in fear now spoke in truth. Caldwell Industries collapsed under its own lies, and the world moved on to other scandals, other news. But for Ethan, and for those who had walked through the fire beside him, something deeper remained, a stillness that could only come after surviving a storm. He stood by his father's grave that morning, the air heavy with spring rain. The grass was greener than he remembered, fresh and alive. He knelt, brushed the wet soil with his hand, and whispered, "We did it, Dad." The truth came out. His voice cracked, not with pain this time, but gratitude. He left a small wooden cross by the tombstone, carved with the words, "Faith over fear." Behind him, Martha waited quietly. She had grown older, yes, but stronger too. Her eyes no longer carried the endless sorrow they once did. Instead, they carried wisdom, the kind only born through grief and grace. "Your father would be proud," she said softly. Ethan smiled. "I think he knows." They drove back to the farmhouse, the same one that had seen tears, fights, and prayers in equal measure. Inside, life was simple again. The table was still scratched, the clock still ticking slow, but there was peace in that rhythm. Ethan had started teaching carpentry at the local high school, helping kids who'd lost their way find meaning through their hands. Building something, he told them, isn't about the wood. It's about believing what's broken can still become beautiful. One afternoon, as the sun poured through the windows, a familiar car pulled into the yard. It was Father Rayner. He stepped out, smiling, holding a small envelope. "This came to the church," he said, handing it to Ethan. The handwriting was neat, almost formal. Inside was a short letter, "Mr. Hayes. Truth has a way of burning through even the thickest lies. I have resigned. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted to tell you. You were right. Your father was right. I'm leaving the country for a while, but maybe someday I'll find my way back to faith." Ethan folded the letter slowly, then looked up at Rayner. "Caldwell?" Rayner nodded. "It seems even stone can crack when light hits it long enough." For a moment, Ethan said nothing. Then he smiled faintly. "I don't hate him anymore. I don't even want revenge. I just hope he finds peace, the real kind." That night, Ethan sat on the porch, watching the stars blink awake. The world was quiet. He thought about all that had happened, the betrayal, the loss, the endless nights of questioning. But now, with the cool breeze brushing his skin and the crickets humming softly, he realized something. Pain hadn't destroyed him. It had refined him. The truth wasn't a weapon. It was a light. And light, once ignited, never truly dies. He picked up his journal, the one he had started after his father's death. The first pages were full of anger, confusion, scribbled prayers that didn't make sense. But as he flipped through, the words grew softer, more hopeful. He began writing again. "There's a strange kind of beauty in broken things," he wrote. "They let the light in easier. We spend so much of life trying to hide our cracks, our shame, our mistakes, our fears, when maybe those cracks are the very places where grace wants to shine through." He paused, tapping the pen against the page. Then continued. "If you're reading this and you're standing in your own fire, wondering if it's ever going to end, listen to me. It will. Maybe not the way you expect, maybe not on your timeline, but the fire you fear is also the one that purifies you. Don't run from it. Walk through it. Because when you do, you'll find that the ashes don't mean it's over. They mean something new can begin." Tears filled his eyes as he closed the journal. Somewhere inside, he knew his story wasn't just his. It was for every person who'd been lied to, betrayed, broken, for anyone who'd thought the darkness would last forever. The next Sunday, the church was full again. Ethan was invited to speak. He stood at the front, hands trembling slightly, looking out at the familiar faces, farmers, teachers, mothers, and sons. People who had seen both the ugliness and the miracle of truth. I used to think faith meant never doubting, he began. But I was wrong. Faith isn't about never falling. It's about getting up, even when you can't see the ground beneath you. It's about trusting that God's light can reach even the deepest pit. And it did for me. He looked around, catching the eyes of those who once avoided him, now nodding through tears. The truth can hurt, he continued, voice steady. But lies, they destroy. And when you choose to stand for what's right, even when it costs you, you're not losing. You're becoming the kind of person this world desperately needs. When the service ended, a woman approached him, someone he didn't know. She was middle-aged, her hands calloused, her eyes soft. My husband worked at Caldwell, she said. He lost everything when he tried to speak up. But after hearing you, he said maybe it wasn't for nothing. Thank you. Ethan nodded, words caught in his throat. He didn't need applause or headlines. This, right here, was why it all mattered. That night, back on the porch, Martha brought 2 cups of tea. They sat together in silence for a long while. Then she turned to him. You ever think about leaving Maplewood? She asked. Ethan smiled. Sometimes. But I think this town still needs stories like ours. Stories that remind people that even when everything falls apart, faith can still rebuild what fear tried to destroy, she nodded. And together they watched the horizon fade into night. The camera of life, if it could have filmed that moment, would have lingered there, on the quiet strength of a man who learned that truth doesn't end pain, it redeems it. On a mother who never stopped believing that God could turn grief into grace. On a porch light that stayed on through the darkest nights, just to remind the world that someone was still home. So if you're listening now, if your heart is heavy, your world collapsing, your hope dimming, let this story be your reminder. You are not forgotten. The fire that's breaking you is also shaping you. Don't give up. Don't lose faith. Truth, love, and grace will always rise again. Because sometimes, the miracle isn't that the storm stops, it's that you learn how to stand in the rain and still lift your face toward heaven. And if this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that light still lives where love dares to stay, don't keep it to yourself. Subscribe, share it, let others find hope too. Because someone out there tonight needs to hear what you just did. That no matter how dark it gets, there's always light waiting. And it begins with truth.